The first thing locals noticed wasn't the removal vans, it wasn't the security, it wasn't even the increased activity around the estate, it was the smell. Over the past few days, residents near Marsh Farm began reporting a strong, unmistakable odor drifting across the countryside, and it didn't take long to figure out why. At least 20 tankers had been seen moving back and forth behind the property, unloading what's estimated to be around 150,000 gallons of liquid manure onto the surrounding fields. Now, on the surface, that might sound like routine agricultural work. After all, Sandringham is a working estate. But the timing of it all is what raised eyebrows, because this wasn't just any part of the estate. This is where Prince Andrew has now officially been relocated. And suddenly, what should have been a quiet, behind-the-scenes move became something far more visible and far more talked about. The relocation itself had been expected for some time. There had been ongoing reports that Andrew would be moved out of Royal Lodge and into a smaller residence on the Sandringham estate. But the way this transition is unfolding has made it impossible to ignore. This week alone, 3 large removal vans were spotted arriving at Marsh Farm, confirming that the move is no longer speculation, it is actively happening. And not just any moving company was involved. The firm handling the relocation, Gander & White, is known for transporting high-value items, including fine art and rare collections. That detail hasn't gone unnoticed. Because when a company like that is involved, it suggests this isn't just a basic downsizing. It points to the movement of valuable possessions, carefully packed, carefully handled, and likely being reinstalled inside the farmhouse. Pieces from Andrew's previous residence, Royal Lodge, may now be making their way into this much smaller, far more modest property. And that contrast is part of what makes this moment so striking. For years, Andrew lived in one of the grander royal residences, a symbol of status, proximity to power, and royal privilege. Now, everything about this move signals a shift. A smaller home, a quieter setting, and a relocation that, despite efforts to keep it low profile, is playing out in full view of the public. Even the preparation of the land itself has become part of the story. Because while manure spreading might be standard for farmland, the sheer volume, the timing, and the coincidence with Andrew's arrival has led to speculation, curiosity, and, in some cases, blunt commentary from locals who are watching it all unfold in real time. That includes items that were once displayed inside Royal Lodge, some of which are believed to be connected to the wider royal collection. And that detail alone has raised quiet questions about what exactly is being moved, what remains behind, and how much of Andrew's former life is being carried into this new, far more contained setting. But long before the first removal van even pulled up, the transformation of the property had already begun. Marsh Farm did not simply receive a new occupant, it was reshaped in preparation. One of the most noticeable changes is right at the entrance, where large wooden security gates have now been installed. They weren't there before. This wasn't an upgrade to an already secured estate. This was a clear addition, something deliberate, something designed to change how the property is accessed and seen from the outside. And behind those gates, the work has been constant. Builders have been on site for months, moving through the farmhouse room by room. Interiors have been reworked, carpets laid down, walls repainted, and fittings updated. It's not a full reconstruction, but it's also far from a light refresh. It's the kind of preparation that suggests the property needed to be brought up to a certain standard before anyone could comfortably move in. Outside, the changes continue. Landscaping has been adjusted, the grounds have been tidied and reshaped, and the entire area has taken on a more controlled, more finished appearance. Locals say the work has been ongoing since early in the year, but in recent weeks, the pace has clearly picked up. What was once gradual suddenly became urgent, as if a deadline had quietly arrived. And then came the tankers. According to multiple local reports, tractors and large white tanker vehicles began appearing behind Marsh Farm, moving steadily across the fields. They weren't just passing through, they were unloading, again and again, spreading liquid organic manure across the land directly surrounding the property. On paper, it's standard agricultural practice, fertilizing fields, preparing soil, maintaining farmland. But the scale of it, combined with the timing, has made people look twice. That includes items once displayed at Royal Lodge, some of which are believed to have ties to the wider royal collection. And while the movement of those pieces has sparked its own quiet speculation, what is happening outside the house may be even more revealing than what is being carried inside. Because by the time the vans arrived, Marsh Farm was no longer just a property waiting for a new occupant. It had already been carefully prepared, adjusted, and brought into line with something much bigger than a single relocation. The installation of large wooden security gates, the steady work of builders inside, the landscaping changes across the grounds, all of it pointed to a coordinated effort that had been building for months. But the most talked about detail, the one no one could ignore, was what was happening just beyond the property line. According to local reports, tractors and large white tanker vehicles had been moving across the fields behind Marsh Farm, spreading liquid organic manure over a wide area. At first glance, it looked unusual, especially given the timing. But in reality, it is part of a much broader system that has been quietly reshaping the entire Sandringham estate. That shift began in 2018, when King Charles took direct control of estate operations and pushed for a transition toward fully organic farming. Since then, Sandringham has been run not just as a royal residence, but as a working agricultural model, built around sustainability and self-sufficiency. At the center of that system is a herd of roughly 500 cattle, whose waste is not discarded, but repurposed. Through a process known as anaerobic digestion, the manure is broken down and converted into a nutrient-rich fertilizer. It contains key elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, all essential for maintaining soil health without relying on synthetic chemicals. From a farming perspective, this is entirely standard practice for an organic estate of this scale. But what stands out here is not the method, it is the volume. Estimates suggest that around 150,000 gallons were delivered and spread over the course of several days, a level of activity that is difficult to overlook, especially when it coincides so precisely with Andrew's arrival at Marsh Farm. For some, that timing feels almost too perfect. Not because the process itself is unusual, but because of how visible it has become at exactly the moment public attention is already focused on the property. What would normally be routine agricultural work has instead become part of a much larger narrative, simply because of when it is happening and who is moving in. And this is not a short-term operation either. Earlier this year, in January, planning permission was granted for the construction of a large slurry lagoon on the estate. The proposed structure is said to be the size of 3 Olympic swimming pools, designed to store and manage organic waste on a much larger scale moving forward. Its location has also drawn attention. It sits less than a mile from Anmer Hall, the residence of the Prince and Princess of Wales, placing it within close proximity to some of the most high-profile members of the royal family. So, while the manure activity around Marsh Farm might initially seem like an odd or even jarring detail, it is actually part of a long-term transformation of how Sandringham operates. A shift toward sustainability, efficiency, and large-scale organic farming. Andrew, who once lived in the sprawling 30-bedroom Royal Lodge, is now settling into a 5-bedroom farmhouse at Marsh Farm, surrounded not by manicured royal grounds, but by working farmland, active agricultural operations, and the unmistakable signs of a functioning estate. It is, by every measure, a completely different environment. Gone are the expansive private gardens and the sense of separation that came with a residence like Royal Lodge. In its place is something more contained, more practical, and far more exposed to the rhythms of daily estate life. Tractors move across nearby fields, fertilization takes place within view, and the property itself feels less like a royal retreat and more like a working home within a larger system. And according to multiple reports, that adjustment has not been easy. Sources close to the situation have suggested that Andrew was reluctant to move to Marsh Farm from the very beginning. The scale alone represents a major shift. After decades of living in some of the most spacious and prestigious residences available to members of the royal family, transitioning to a farmhouse, no matter how well prepared, is not just a logistical change. It is a psychological one. There have also been practical challenges. One of the biggest questions surrounding the move has been what exactly he could take with him. Royal Lodge allowed for extensive collections, artwork, furnishings, and personal items accumulated over years. Marsh Farm does not offer that same capacity. As a result, his belongings are reportedly being moved in stages, with decisions having to be made about what stays, what goes, and what simply cannot be accommodated. Even some items with personal or historical significance are said to be part of that ongoing process, carefully selected rather than automatically transferred. And then there are the smaller details, the ones that might seem insignificant at first, but actually say a lot about the scale of the change. Andrew's well-known collection of teddy bears, reportedly numbering around 72, has been reduced to just one making the move with him. On the surface, it might sound like a trivial detail, but it reflects something deeper. Downsizing is not just about space, it is about letting go of the familiar, of routines, of objects that once filled a much larger life. That same shift extends to staffing. At Royal Lodge, Andrew had access to full household support, a structured team that handled everything from daily operations to personal assistance. At Marsh Farm, that level of service is no longer in place. Reports suggest that any support now is far more limited, potentially available only on an occasional or rotational basis. While some locals have chosen to keep their distance, others have been far more vocal, openly questioning not just the move itself, but what it represents in a broader sense. And the overall reaction has been noticeably restrained rather than welcoming. There is no sense of celebration surrounding this relocation, no visible support or enthusiasm, and for many observing from nearby communities, the tone has been one of quiet skepticism mixed with a desire to remain uninvolved. What makes the situation even more striking is how deliberately it is all unfolded behind the scenes, without any public acknowledgement from Andrew himself since returning to Wood Farm after being arrested and questioned by police last month. There have been no statements, no appearances, and no attempt to address the situation publicly, which has only added to the sense that everything is being managed quietly, but with clear intent. At the same time, activity on the ground has continued steadily, with renovations being completed, security measures upgraded, and agricultural operations proceeding at full scale, all leading up to the final stage of the move as removal vans arrived and personal belongings were transferred into the property. The scale and nature of these preparations strongly suggest that this is not a temporary arrangement, but rather a long-term relocation, reinforced by the installation of permanent gates and the careful movement of selected possessions from his previous residence. The contrast this creates is difficult to ignore, as a former senior royal who once occupied a central position within public life is now settling into a farmhouse environment defined by working land, organic farming systems, and a level of isolation that marks a clear departure from the world he previously inhabited. Although the property itself may still appear comfortable or even luxurious to many observers, the context in which this move is taking place fundamentally changes how it is perceived. According to various reports and accounts from those familiar with the situation, the adjustment has not been received particularly well, with one word appearing repeatedly in descriptions of Andrew's reaction, entitled. For someone accustomed to a certain level of privilege, scale, and structure, this relocation represents not just a physical change in residence, but a visible shift in status, one that carries implications beyond the walls of the property itself. And yet, despite all of these elements, the detail that has drawn the most attention is not the house, the renovations, or even the relocation process, but what happened in the days leading up to his arrival, when approximately 150,000 gallons of manure were spread across the surrounding fields. While this activity is entirely consistent with the estate's organic farming practices, its timing and visibility have made it impossible to separate from the broader narrative. Because when something so noticeable takes place at precisely the moment a move like this is unfolding, it inevitably invites interpretation, whether intentional or not, and raises a question that many people are now asking. Was this simply a matter of routine agricultural work carried out as scheduled, or does it, in context, reflect something more symbolic about Andrew's current position within the royal structure? And perhaps more importantly, how do you think he is responding to all of this behind closed doors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more updates like this, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next.